A woman in a red bourgeois dress stood waving her fan. The scarlet light of the sunset seeped through the palace windows, making her figure rather sinister, and the sarcastic smile on her face only added to the power of the image. Opposite her stood a frightened young maiden, cradling her infant in her arms. The powerful woman had told her that she would now be the one to raise her child. The young girl did not understand why her child should be brought up by someone else, since she was its mother. The child was smiling carefree in her arms. The woman in red covered her face with a fan to hide a wry smile and declared that she would be the best mother for the child. She asked the young woman not to worry and to leave, or the child would be left without a mother who was terminally ill. The young girl woke up lying in bed. It was all a memory of the future that made sweat run down her face. The girl was tormented by the words of the woman in red about an incurable disease. The young girl was immersed in her thoughts. She thought everything that happened to her was an accident. Iris decided to remember her childhood. Her parents were involved in cultural research. Their work focused on studying unique cultures and researching artifacts around the world. So there were always many foreign objects in little Iris's home that she was not supposed to touch. One of them was a necklace with a small mirror inside. Her mother told young Iris that it was a magic mirror. When she looked into it, she could see herself at a certain point in the future, but only 3 times. Her mother asked the girl to use the mirror only when it was vital. Young Iris promised to do just that. Sometime later, the young lady's parents died in an accident. The necklace was the only possession left to her by her mother. Since then, Iris had never opened it to look into the mirror. However, 15 years later, on the day of the Academy's annual festival, the girl suddenly looked into it. Iris sat at the window and looked out into the courtyard. Outside, the female students were jokingly offering passers-by a glimpse into the future with crystal balls. She wondered if there was something special in her future. The girl was in her last year at the Academy and was about to graduate. After graduation, she is to marry her fiancé, Theo Morph, and become his wife. Theo's grandfather, Duke Morph, hoped that Iris would have a son with Theo as soon as possible so that she could concentrate fully on the family work. The girl felt sad at these thoughts. She thought that this was how her freedom would end. For her, the future was too predictable. Iris had absolutely no doubts about it. It seemed to her that she was going to become the Duchess of Morph anyway, to help Theo and take care of his son. As his grandfather had wanted, with the Morph's help, she was able to enter the Academy. The girl saw only one single reason for the Duke's support, the idea that since she was so good to Theo, she could bear him a healthy son. That's why her grades at the Academy had to be excellent. But when Iris finished her studies, she wouldn't be able to work. Her future would be a family. The girl was well aware that her future had already been determined. Iris sighed heavily. The necklace continued to bother her. The girl thought that Theo couldn't disobey the Duke's order, and this old man wasn't going to give up on her. She didn't know how to feel. The girl took the necklace in her hand and opened it. She stared at her reflection in the mirror and couldn't tell if it could really show her future. It was obvious to her what kind of life awaited her. In Iris's mind, she and Theo should be a normal couple, with a son like his father and a daughter like her mother. It would be a peaceful life. Iris would rather have such an obvious future than hope for anything else when looking in the mirror. She thought back to the words of the woman in the red dress. Having seen her future, the girl now thought that if she suddenly became terminally ill, Theo would leave her and marry another woman. The girl was lying on the bed and looking at the ceiling, immersed in her thoughts. She smelled disinfectant. Iris hated that smell. It reminded her of the day her parents died. Iris pulled herself up. She realized that she had seen the future through the mirror and lost consciousness. Suddenly, Theo's voice sounded. He said it was better for Iris to stay in bed. The girl, noticing Theo sitting next to her, immediately apologized to him. She felt that she had caused him a lot of trouble. Theo said nonchalantly that it was all right. Iris remembered that today was a festival, and Theo is a member of the student council. During this event, all he has to do is take care of the whole organization. All because Duke Morph asked him to. Theo told Iris that he was in charge of the wounded this year. He hadn't expected his fiancée to be dragged out of the abandoned library like that. The girl, feeling all the guilt, ducked her head in frustration and apologized to him once more. Theo, however, remained unperturbed. Theo told Iris that the doctor had diagnosed her with anemia. Theo asked her to see their doctor when they got home. Iris said it was unnecessary because she was just dizzy. However, Theo insisted on going to the doctor. He didn't want her grandfather to scold her afterward. Iris agreed with him. But deep down, the girl realized that Theo was so concerned about her health only because his grandfather, the Duke, was worried about the health of his future grandson. Iris must undergo medical checkups every year, must maintain an appropriate weight as recommended by Grandpa Theo's doctors, and must follow a strict diet for the sake of her unborn child's health. The girl was amazed that even with such care for her health, she would still end up getting sick. She thought it was strange that no one had noticed, given all the constant medical checkups. Iris clutched the sheet with anger and helplessness to change anything. She was sure that if the Duke had known about it earlier, he would never have chosen her as Theo's bride. Iris decided to find out if she had the same incurable disease she didn't have yet. She got out of bed and told Theo that she was leaving. However, the young man replied that he had to go too. The girl was slightly surprised by his answer. Iris asked Theo if he shouldn't stay here until the end of the festival. The girl thought for a few seconds that the young man was worried about her. However, Theo knocked Iris out of his thoughts and stated that he had gotten his clothes a little dirty, so he decided to go change and come back here a little later. That phrase literally brought the girl back to reality. The young man was just being rather neat, and she had time to think that he was leaving for her. Theo is certainly kind, but somewhat indifferent and cold, so she shouldn't have expected anything out of the ordinary from him. That's the kind of relationship she had with Theo. After a while, Iris was already riding with Theo in a carriage towards the palace. The girl sat opposite him, but all her thoughts were occupied with the image of the woman in red. The woman from the future seemed so beautiful. Her golden hair was down her back, and her name was Mia Craven, and unfortunately, she was familiar to Iris. She was a distant relative of Theo's, the daughter of Baron Craven, the godfather of the future Duke of Morph. Iris couldn't help but know her, for she had been a frequent visitor to the Duchy of Morph when they were children. After learning that Iris had been taken away to bear Theo's child in the future, Mia Craven probably wanted to get rid of her. In addition, Mia could not openly express her feelings for Theo because she was afraid of the Duke. The Duke trusted Iris a lot, so it was hard for her to understand why Mia Craven wanted her to leave her son and go away. The girl could only explain it to herself in two ways. Either everyone knew she didn't have long to live, or Duke Morph died around the same time. Either way, that would be enough to understand the situation. And that was what Iris was most curious about. The girl wondered if it was Mia Craven who had decided to kick her out, or if it was Theo who had suggested it to her. Iris looked thoughtfully out the window. She was tormented by thoughts about the young man. Maybe he had been in love with Mia all along. Theo interrupted Iris's musings and asked what had happened to her. The girl embarrassedly replied that it was nothing, just a trifle. Then she became despondent again and withdrew into herself. No matter how much Iris thought, she couldn't find a solution. The girl called out to Theo and asked him if he loved anyone. Theo was surprised by this question and asked Iris a counter-question. He asked her why she was suddenly curious about who he loved. The girl replied that they would be graduating soon, so it was important for her to know if Theo was sure that he wanted to marry her. The boy said that he didn't know what she was talking about. Iris covered her eyes to stifle her protruding tears. She asked Theo if they had other options besides marriage. She wondered why the young man wouldn't just give up on marriage if he loved someone else. When the girl realized that her marriage was not going to be a very happy one, she began to have doubts, as she had previously taken it for granted that she and Theo were going to get married. The young man with a nonchalant face directly asked the girl if she was suddenly trying to pretend that the proposal made by his grandfather, the Duke, didn't exist. Iris was a little confused by such a question, but still answered Theo that she owed Duke Morph a lot for his support and would always be grateful to him. After all, he had raised a girl who was only a noblewoman from a fallen family, not a princess. Even if it's just an investment in her newborn grandson's future, Iris is still grateful to her grandfather. However, now the girl knows it's her end will be an unhappy one, so she must find any way to avoid it. The girl told Theo that if he had someone on the side, maybe someone he wanted to marry for sure, in that case, something should be done right now before it was too late. The young man was indignant and asked Iris if she really wanted him to break the contract her grandfather had made with her himself, and thus blame him for everything. The girl was frightened and immediately began to justify herself and apologize to Theo because he had misunderstood her. She wanted to tell him something else, but it was too late. The young man didn't understand what Iris was thinking. He decided maybe the maiden didn't want to marry him. The thought made his fist clench, expressing his anger. However, it wasn't like that. Iris had never even thought about it, for it had been decided from early childhood that she would become Theo's wife. Now, however, she was terrified of the future she saw today. Therefore, she couldn't accept this marriage as easily as she always had. The young man said that if Iris had another man, she should go to him. Theo realized that his grandfather would not allow the girl to cause a scandal. The girl started to fight back. She shouted that she had no one. If she had another man, it would be a big problem. Iris added that she was just a little worried about prom and asked Theo to forget about what she had said. The young man silently averted his gaze from the girl. He had been used to the cold since childhood. It had happened to him that cold winter, and Iris still got goosebumps remembering it. She was a pure-blooded, intelligent, and well-behaved girl. Iris combined exactly the qualities of a daughter-in-law that Duke Morph wanted. In high society, there was a story of Count Morph, who threw everything and ran away because of his love for a commoner. It was so romanticized for the people that someone even published a children's book with their story. The Count's love was perfect until the very end. After working hard all his life, the Count suddenly fell ill just before he died. That's when he bequeathed the care of his wife and son, Theo Morphy, to his father. And so ended this romantic story. But it is not clear how Duke Morph felt after the sudden loss of his only son. He felt that he had raised a shameless son and wished that his grandson would never become the same. Soon, Duke Morph puts his grandson in a prison, cutting off all communication with the outside world. In addition, he decides that he will choose his own bride for his grandson. He wondered how, regardless of background, to judge the intelligence and behavior of his grandson's future bride. The dubious old man thought that it was impossible to know all this in a short meeting. In the end, he decided to take a girl with good blood into his care and raise an ideal daughter-in-law out of her. In the end, the perfect candidate for this role was Iris. The girl rode in the wagon, wrapped in warm clothes, but she was still cold. The woman sitting opposite was explaining to the young woman that she was very lucky that the Duke had chosen her. Therefore, the girl should listen to him carefully and obey all orders. In turn, His Excellency will be merciful to her. It was truly horrible. For an orphan who lost her parents at the age of 10, it was exhausting to hear about how good her guardian was. Baron Roca, though he had a modest title, was a famous scholar. Baroness Roca was also an intelligent and noble lady. Since the Duke liked Iris's parents, he decided to take custody of her. The woman told the girl that she could consider Duke Morph's guardianship a parting gift left by her parents. Little Iris had lived in a dilapidated house not so long ago, and now she was in such a cold place. It was hard for her to realize the death of her parents. Cultural anthropology was a discipline that required a lot of research and exposure. It was a field where there was no money and research progressed slowly. But the girl's dad said it was fun to study culture that fit the environment. He was murdered by a young radical who pursued the idea of racial superiority. Iris managed to stay alive only because she fell asleep early and stayed in the room. The girl's father, while alive, published several articles defending the culture of other countries. Therefore, his funeral attracted more attention from other countries. That must have been what caught Duke Morph's attention. But no matter how famous a scientist her father was, Iris was still just a girl who had lost her parents. She felt like she was in a nightmare. The carriage arrived at the place. The girl opened the door and stepped into the snow. It was blizzardy and cold outside, and she saw a huge Gothic-style palace. The snow was so thick because of the blizzard that Iris could hardly walk. She wanted to get into the warmth, drink hot cocoa, and sleep. When she opened her eyes, she dreamed of seeing her mother and father smiling and hugging her. But that was just her imagination. In reality, she had no choice but to accept her situation. The girl came to the entrance of the palace and saw Duke Morpheus standing on the threshold with a serene expression on his face. It seemed to her that he was looking at her as his prey. Little Iris didn't like this man because he was the reason she was standing out in the cold, in the middle of this blizzard. She realized there was no hot chocolate here. The girl introduced herself to Duke Morphe as Iris Rocca. Irises are usually called flowers, and since they share the same name, most people assume her name comes from the flower. But that's not why the girl's father said he named her that. Her father was an unusual man. He didn't think like others. Across the sea, in the language of the Pace people, the name means rainbow. They say it is because a rainbow appears when God's messenger of victory passes by. Duke Morph knew of the true meaning of the girl's name, and he liked it. Iris thought her test would end there, but it was only the beginning. It had been days since the girl had gotten to the Duchy of Morph. But she still felt restless. She felt as if the people around her were watching her every move and reporting every action to the Duke. On top of everything else, Iris was freezing cold. She wanted to adapt to Morphe, but she couldn't get used to the climate here. Duke Morphe's palace was built some 200 years ago. It was sturdy and ancient enough to brag about. Except that the 200-year-old technology couldn't completely insulate the building from the cold. Of course, the building was regularly repaired, but since the space of the castle built was not very large, it was difficult to make sufficient insulation. Therefore, wherever the little girl was in the castle, the cold penetrated her whole body like needles. Her hands were constantly red and shivering from the frost. There was, however, one warm place in the castle. Young Iris was always sent there by her nurse. It was a greenhouse where flowers and plants were grown, so the little girl often went to the greenhouse. Sometimes she used the flowers as an excuse to just read a book there. But today, she was going to pick flowers. Iris wondered if Duke Morph would like it if she made a bouquet for him. It was probably the only one for her to keep calm. Recently, the people of the Duchy of Morph hadn't been watching her as closely as they had in the beginning. But that still wasn't enough for the girl. They continued to just stare at her as before, saying nothing. The young woman thought that was all, because Duke Morph hadn't given them any orders yet. First of all, the girl decided for herself that she must make friends with Duke Morphe. He didn't usually go into the greenhouse, so he rarely saw the flowers. So Iris wanted to gather more flowers and decorate them beautifully. Suddenly, the girl noticed a red-haired woman, covered by the leaves of a tree. Iris thought it was strange, because usually no one came to the greenhouse. She approached the stranger and called out to her. The red-haired woman turned to the girl. Iris gazed into her facial features. She seemed incredibly beautiful to her. The woman spoke to the little girl. A wide smile, a soft and friendly voice. It was the first time the girl had heard such a voice from someone in the duchy. Everyone in the Morafa family treated her like an adult, except this woman. A little girl told a red-haired beauty that she came here to pick a bunch of flowers. The kind woman asked her to be careful and to wear gloves, because some flowers have sharp thorns. Besides, the beautiful girl decided to help the little girl herself. She plucked a rose and handed it to the girl. Iris was frightened because of the thorns, but the woman reassured her, saying that she had rough hands, so thorns were not a problem for her. The red-haired lady praised the girl for her kindness, and together they went to pick other flowers for the bouquet. Iris was surprised to see that the woman was barefoot. The red-haired lady noticed the girl's gaze. She said she was uncomfortable in the hard shoes, so she took them off. The woman asked her not to tell anyone about it. The girl promised not to tell anyone. Iris found the shoes very uncomfortable too, especially in a place where it was cold and her fingertips ached. The girl had fur boots, of course, but for some reason it seemed to her that Duke Morphe might not be happy about it. The girls walked through the greenhouse together and continued to talk sweetly. Until now, Iris hadn't realized why she was here. All she knew was that Duke Morph had become her guardian. The girl just kept quiet, afraid that she would be kicked out if she asked. But she confided in the woman and told her that her parents had been killed suddenly, so she had nowhere else to go. The woman was literally dumbfounded by the little girl's story and asked how she was feeling. Iris answered that everything was fine because she couldn't cry, otherwise the adults would be displeased with her. The red-haired woman interrupted the girl and said that it was quite normal to be sad when someone died, especially if you are a child. The little girl let out a tear at such kind words. It's okay to cry, but everyone hates it when she cries. It had been so long since something warm had been said to her, so she couldn't hold back her emotions any longer and sobbed. The red-haired woman praised the girl for being able to bear the loss of her loved ones. She was sorry that all this had happened to such a little girl. Iris, through her tears, thanked the woman for her kind words. The red-haired woman said that the girl could come to her again if she wanted to talk. She would always be waiting. Even in such a short conversation, the girl really understood that a really good person was talking to her. Little Iris asked the woman not to tell anyone that she had cried here. At the time, she was more afraid that Duke Morph might find out that she had been crying than she was happy to meet such a sweet girl. The red-haired woman agreed with the little girl. She promised that since they were friends now, she would keep their conversations secret. The red-haired woman seemed so kind and good, just like her mom. Suddenly, the red-haired woman was called by little Theo. It turned out that she was his mom. The boy said it was time for them to go. The girl was startled to see her son. Theo's mother reassured the little girl, saying that her son would keep their secret too. After all, he keeps them even better than she does. So now, they would keep their secrets together. The boy at this time was gazing intently at little Iris. The red-haired woman declared that she and her son should be on their way and said goodbye to the little girl, saying lastly that they would see each other again. Iris, picking up a bunch of flowers, ran to Duke Morph's office. The door was ajar. The girl peeked through the crack and saw Morphe sitting at his desk, talking to a man. The little girl decided to go inside. She placed a jar of flowers on Duke Morph's table. He asked her what they were. Iris said that she had picked these flowers in the greenhouse, and if the Duke didn't like them, she would remove them now. Duke Morph was surprised that the girl knew how to pick bouquets. Iris told Duke Morph that her mother had taught her how to do it. A man standing nearby confirmed the girl's words, adding that Baroness Roca was responsible for preparing the wedding bouquet for the Empress of Passadia. The little girl wasn't wrong to think that the surrounding servants were watching her. She felt like they literally knew everything about her, which made Iris feel uncomfortable. Duke Morph asked the girl interestedly why she had suddenly decided to give him flowers. Iris replied that she didn't have any particular reason. She just hoped that the Lord would like them. Duke Morphe grinned at Iris's response. He decided that in fact, in this way, the girl wanted to look good in front of him. So it was a kind of bribe. The girl realized that she had never met someone so difficult. But at the same time, she realized that bribes were really bad. She was very nervous and didn't know what she should answer Duke Morph. However, he was right that in this way, she wanted to please him. Duke Morphe told the girl not to worry. He didn't see anything wrong in this act. After all, the fact that Iris wants to look good in front of him also means that she recognizes his authority. Duke Morph ordered the man standing next to him to hire a tutor for Baron Roca's daughter. He wanted her to begin her studies as of tomorrow. Duke Morph also addressed Iris personally, calling her by name for the first time ever. The little girl was impressed by this, and she stood at attention, waiting to hear what he had to say. Duke Morph told her that he hates flowers. Whenever he sees them, he wants to destroy them. However, he still thanked the little girl for her humble gift. Duke Morphe was somehow sure that Iris's future child would be as fond of flowers as she was. That was what he told her. The little girl was surprised to hear this. At that moment, she had no idea what he was talking about. Duke Morph again summoned the man with a gesture of his hand and ordered him to introduce Iris to Theo. The girl was introduced to Prince Theo Morphe. She was told that he was the one who would become the new Duke of Morph in the future. Iris recognized him. It was the boy she had seen in the greenhouse. The boy looked a lot like Duke Morph. Incredible black hair and beautiful blue eyes. He was both a cute yet intimidating child at the same time. The little girl was confused. She didn't know what to say, because it wasn't the first time they had met. She thought that Duke Morph might be angry if he knew that she and Theo had met before. As the girl stood and went over the options in her head, the boy introduced himself to her as Theomorphy. That meant he decided to pretend as if they didn't know each other. Iris introduced herself back to him and added that she was glad to meet him. The boy did not answer the young lady at all and even turned away from her. He went on about his business, exploring the books in the vast library. The servant corrected his glasses on his face, apologized for the future Duke's behavior in front of the little girl, and said that Theo was usually very quiet and reserved. The girl remembered that the red-haired woman, aka Madame Lana, had told her the same thing. But Iris was embarrassed that the boy had just said hello and left without even saying goodbye. The servant added that since the girl was now the bride of young Mr. Theo, she would have to get used to his behavior. He felt that this would not change even when they were married. Iris asked the man with great surprise what he meant. The servant replied that Duke Morph had brought her here specifically to be the wife of his only grandson, Theodore. The little girl's eyes grew even bigger in surprise than before. After all, she just couldn't believe what was happening. She had always thought that Duke Morph wanted to be her guardian. After some time, the best tutors and educational plans were prepared for Iris. She was told that from the next day, she could start classes. And of course, the girl is obliged to study responsibly, since she has not yet officially become the Lord's bride. Here it was made clear to the little girl that she could be thrown out at any moment. The servant told Iris that she was the only one who had made it this far so far. So he hoped that she would fulfill their hopes and study well. Thanks to these words, the young maiden was able to realize that there were several other candidates for the role of bride who, if she did not pass the test, could become Theo's wife. Iris met one of them a couple of days later. A blonde-haired girl with obvious aggression was asking Iris who she was. This disgruntled girl was the same Mia Craven, a distant relative of Duke Morph. Mia Craven stood behind Theo's back and asked the boy who Iris was. They both looked at each other in silence. The young lady didn't know how to introduce herself when suddenly a servant called out to her, saying that her tutor had arrived. Iris made a hasty exit. That only made Mia Craven angrier, for the young woman had ignored her. She shouted after her, expressing her displeasure. The servant, however, praised Iris, saying that Duke Morph was right about her and that she had done the right thing. The servant praised Iris, saying that Duke Morph was right and that she had done the right thing. The little girl just stood there with her head down and obediently agreed with him. She did not understand what she had done and why he was praising her. Then the servant explained to the young lady that the aggressive girl was Mia Craven, and that she was one of the candidates for the role of the future Duchess, and consequently, Theodore's wife. The girl replied to the man that she didn't seem to have much chance of becoming the next Duchess, since Mia Craven had come here so quietly and could leave just as quietly. Besides, Theo seemed friendly towards Mia Craven. The servant said that it wasn't like that Mia Craven was the least suitable candidate in Duke Morph's eyes. He asked Iris not to worry about it. No matter how many times the little girl met Duke Morph, she would only see his cold gaze all the time. Since no one cared about her opinion, she simply agreed with the servant. Iris watched Theo and Mia chatting downstairs from the top floor. The girl noticed that Mia Craven often came here to play. She was sad and hurt to see them together. Mia Craven was showing off her new dress in front of Theo. Iris was surprised, because it seemed to her that Mia was not the kind of person who would show off new things like that. On their first meeting, Mia had a cold expression on her face. Now she was showing off her dress to Theo with a bright smile. Iris found it hard to believe, and yet she found her competitor quite beautiful and bold. Mia had fair skin and lovely eyes, golden hair, and a soft gaze. She looked like the daughter of a powerful aristocrat or a princess. Iris covered her eyes in envy. At that moment, she felt the future Duke's gaze on her. But opening her eyes, the little girl saw that Theo was still sitting downstairs on the sofa, looking at a book. The young woman thought she was just imagining things. She turned around to go about her business. Theo continued reading the book, making it clear that he was not interested in his surroundings. Time passed, and spring came to the Duchy of Morph, and all the snow disappeared. The only thing that remained unchanged was the little girl's studies. She sat in front of a stack of books and completed assignments from her tutors. She had no friends at all in the duchy or any toys, so even when the snow came down, she still continued to study. However, Iris was still recognized for her hard work. 5 years later, she managed to enter the Academy of Political Science, which had high admission standards. And in the same year, the young woman now officially became Theo's fiancé. At one of the events, Duke Morph told Iris that political science was a useless knowledge, as the only thing a young person should do was give birth and raise a child, but she could be very useful in the social world in the future. In any case, he believed that the smarter the mother was, the smarter the child would be. Iris agreed unquestioningly with every argument he made, and thanked Duke Morph for everything. Duke Morph's way of thinking was quite simple. He believed that Iris should remain silent, be wise, but not be too straightforward. However, she should still be able to scold her subordinates harshly. In Duke Morph's opinion, Iris should also be a woman capable of managing the internal affairs of the duchy to maintain stability in the mansion. And she should also be able to calmly respond to her husband's demands. At today's engagement ceremony, she had to wear a long-sleeved dress that didn't fit in with the summertime and had an annoying design that covered almost her entire neck, which made the girl feel quite hot. Iris realized that she should have chosen something of a lighter material, but her thoughts faded as soon as she felt Theo's gaze on her. Turning to him, she looked into his eyes with all the kindness she could muster, trying to find some kind of reciprocity. Instead, however, she found only coldness and emptiness in his gaze. The future Duke once again turned away from his bride, switching his attention to a conversation with some nobleman. Thanks to his commitment, Theo was finally officially recognized as the heir to the duchy. However, despite the ceremony, Iris didn't feel relieved, because there was still a group of people who were against her candidacy. There were rumors that Theo was going to enter the academy. Duke Morph confirmed the guests' speculations, adding that the young man was going to enroll in the fencing department and would receive a diploma with a double major. Those around him were impressed by his accomplishments. A woman approached Iris to congratulate her on her engagement. The young Duke was about to leave for the capital, so she wondered if that meant Miss Roca would also go with him to the family mansion. The young daughter-in-law replied to the woman that everything was correct, and she would go with Theo to the capital's mansion. Iris thought she heard her guest mentally clucking her tongue. Many people thought it was wrong for Iris and Theo to live in the same house. After all, the number of people who wanted their daughters to marry Theo had only increased over the years, so it was tiring for Iris to deal with them. The engagement ceremony was in full swing. Under the solemn music, people of high society were chatting with each other, exchanging the latest gossip and rumors. Iris stepped out onto the balcony of the palace. Had she stayed inside a little longer, she would have collapsed from stuffiness. The future Duchess had never thought that a dress could be so uncomfortable. Outside, she was, unfortunately, no better off, since there wasn't even a breeze. Iris thought that at least her shoes would be fine, but her feet were rubbing badly. She decided to take a look at them, and decided that all the problems were because these shoes were taller than usual. No one must see that the future Duchess has taken off her shoes. So she will have to put those shoes back on and go back to the engagement ceremony, pretending that nothing is bothering her. Suddenly, the door of the balcony opened. The girl was slightly startled. It was not the right moment for her to meet someone from aristocratic society. Theo, the future Duke and Iris's husband, appeared from behind the door. The girl was slightly surprised and blushed. The bride had expected to see anyone, but not this young man. Theo approached the girl, grabbed her by the shoulders, and sat her on the railing of the balcony. The girl did not understand what the future Duke wanted from her. She was frightened by the situation. The young man leaned on the railing of the balcony next to her and struck up a conversation. He said that Iris was surprisingly smiling a lot today, despite the fact that someone kept whispering and kept laughing at her. The girl thought it was strange that the future Duke suddenly talked about it with her. Usually he didn't care much about his future wife. Iris thought maybe he was annoyed that everyone ignored her. The girl replied to Theo that she was fine and that no one was making fun of her. Maybe the young master thought so because she did not answer anything to the guests. The future Duke exhaled heavily. He wondered if he should also then act like an idiot when people laughed at him. Iris laughed at his reasoning. Theo preferred to forget about it after all. He started to take off his tie and asked the girl why she had gone outside, since she was the main character of the evening. He even had to excuse himself by saying that he would go and look after her. Iris replied that the young gentleman should go back before her grandfather started swearing. But he reassured her, saying that the Duke had had a little too much to drink, so he was in no condition to swear. The girl had noticed it during the ceremony too, but at the time she had thought she was just imagining it. Now Iris realized that Duke Morpha was really in a good mood today, even though she had been watching him for years. But for some reason just today, looking at him made the girl feel better than usual. At that time, Theo threw his tie to the floor. He looked at Iris with an expression on his face as if he wanted to say something. The girl noticed it. She wondered what was bothering him. She thought that maybe the future Duke didn't like her outfit or her makeup, though he had never said he was unhappy with anything. Then the girl remembered what had happened yesterday and decided that Theo was uncomfortable about it. Iris asked the future Duke if he was all right, because yesterday he had argued with His Excellency. The night before the engagement, Theo told the Duke that he would not compromise. This really struck a chord with the young lady, for she, like Theo, could not act against the Duke's will. The young man had always been quiet and obedient since childhood. Therefore, if he refused to do something, the Duke still forced him to do it, because otherwise it would affect Mrs. Lana, Theo's mother. The vivacious Miss Lana never showed it, but the Duke's actions were persistent and cruel. Sometimes she wasn't given food, and sometimes all the maids were taken away, leaving her alone, or on particularly cold days, not heating her outhouse. After several such occasions, Theo, who loved Miss Lana dearly, ceased to oppose his grandfather. From then on, he became a closed and silent but obedient child. But on the eve of the engagement, Iris, passing by the library, heard Theo speak his mind to Duke Morph. He didn't want to commit himself to his future wife. Iris fidgeted nervously with her hands. The girl realized that it was probably not that Theo didn't like her, but that Duke Morph always decided everything for him. The future Duke asked the young special how much she had heard from their conversation. Iris replied that she hadn't learned anything important. She had just heard some noise as she passed by. She didn't feel like eavesdropping. Theo lowered his head and thought for a moment. Iris thought that it looked like he was just a little embarrassed that his future wife had overheard their argument with the Duke. The girl tried to cheer him up by saying that Duke Morphy was already very old, and that in time, Theo would be able to do whatever he wanted. She asked him to be patient. Theo was furious at the young woman's words. His palm clenched into a fist of anger and hatred. At the same time, his face showed anger. He wanted to take his anger out on her. The young man thought that the girl should say these words not to him, but to herself. Iris was truly frightened when she saw Theo, the future Duke, and her husband. Iris was surprised. She didn't understand what the future Duke was talking about. The girl thought that if there was something Theo didn't want to do, then he simply shouldn't do it, no matter how banal it sounded. The future Duke was furious. The young man yelled at his future wife and told her not to talk to him like that anymore. After a few minutes, he calmed down. Theo turned away from Iris again and told her to go back to her studies, because he didn't want to talk to her anymore. The future Duke ordered her to go to her room, adding that he would deal with the guests himself. The young man left, slamming the door. Iris was alone on the balcony and couldn't hold back her tears. She wished she could get along with Theo, but unknowingly, she always made him angry. She felt like she was going to faint from the suffocating dress. Just as the young woman was about to leave, someone called out to her. It was Mia Craven. She wryly asked Iris to stop drawing attention to herself and get out of the way. Mia Craven made her debut recently. The girl followed her mother everywhere and showed off her radiant smile. Lately, her beauty seemed to bloom like a rose. Iris was sure that she was receiving tons of marriage proposals. Miss Craven, who had visited Duke Morphy a couple of days ago, laughed, saying that she was getting into trouble because her daughter had recently entered the secular world, but was already known for her beauty. The meaning behind the words she spoke to Duke Morph was obvious to everyone. The young lady is still fighting for the future Duke Theo and wants him to be her husband. Mia Craven was sure that the prince would soon realize it and kick Iris out of the house himself. It was obvious to her that a man of such high rank should marry a beautiful woman like her. After Mrs. Craven left, Duke Morph spoke to Iris in a strained voice. He told her that he hates people who don't know their place. Duke Morph asked the girl not to behave recklessly and to show restraint since she was now engaged to Theo. When the girl heard that, she had no choice but to nod. All because she had no parents to protect her. She couldn't do what she wanted to do. She was so jealous about it, while Mia Craven continued to insult her. The girl asked Iris why she was dressed like that. Mia thought that she was the one who was the star for the guests today. Therefore, felt that Iris should act much more forcefully if she wanted to be noticed. Despite all the nasty things her interlocutor had said to her, Iris still replied that Mia looked beautiful. Mia said that she had dressed well on purpose so that no one would pay attention to the Duke's bride. Iris remembered Duke Morph's words. He had said that those who are too outspoken and realize how great they are never know how much they will be retaliated against by those they offend. Her grandfather had told the young girl to try not to talk to such people. Even as a child, he had told Iris that the best thing for her to do was to just ignore Mia's words and not react to them in any way. So Iris once again chose to remain silent. Mia knew the young lady would be silent. She thought Iris was an insufferable little girl. Mia added that she didn't need nice words from her. Compliments from people were natural to Mia, and they didn't please her in any way. Mia Craven asked Iris where Theo was now. He seemed to be the only person she was happy to see. However, without waiting for her daughter-in-law's answer, Mia Craven left. Iris realized that the best solution for her right now would be to just leave, but something was stopping her. Mia Craven had found Theo after all. He was standing on the balcony on the other side of the palace. She called out to him and asked him what he was doing here. The young man looked at her with a puzzled face. Mia Craven assumed he was so moody because of that clumsy girl. The future Duke asked her why she thought so. Iris was standing outside the door listening to their conversation. Mia didn't pursue the subject, realizing that it wouldn't get her anywhere, and asked Theo to evaluate her look for the ceremony today. She said that she had bought a new dress and jewelry just so that the future Duke would look at her today. The young man replied to Mia that she looked fine. This answer confused the girl. She wondered if the young man was always like this. After all, he always had a bitter look no matter what she wore. Despite the fact that Mia is always referred to as a goddess of beauty, despite the fact that she receives so many compliments for her charm from the men around her, Theo has always been adamant to her. The girl gently put her hand on Theo's shoulder and moved closer to him. She said that she could ask her family to choose a groom for her, and they would definitely find her a worthy man among the fan letters. But Theo was the only man she wanted. Theo Morphe, the man who would become the next Duke ruler of the North, and her husband. Mia Craven asked Theo if he thought it was crazy that Iris would be the next mistress of the Duchy of Morph. After all, the future Duke didn't even know where she was from. Besides, Mia Craven thought Iris was too silent and was sure that when she and Theo became a married couple, the duchy would be as quiet as the grave. Iris continued to stand outside the door and eavesdrop on their conversation. She realized that she had nothing to say. Mia was right, because when she and Theo met, they didn't even talk to each other much. Iris was a girl who didn't want to stand out in any way. She believed that there was nothing charming about her at all. All her accessories were simple. Her voice was usually not very loud, and when she walked, she didn't even make noise with her shoes. The girl herself realized that she was like a ghost to those around her. However, each of these characteristics, one by one, had been chosen by Duke Morph. Suddenly, the young girl heard a question that instantly brought her back to reality. Mia Craven asked the future Duke if he really didn't want to marry Iris. She assumed that Theo was only pretending because he couldn't refuse Duke Morph. Iris listened as carefully as she could and waited for the young man's response, but he simply remained silent. Iris immediately began to rack her brain for reasons why he had remained silent. She thought that Theo was really only engaged to her for the reasons that Mia Craven said. Now it was clear to the girl why the future Duke was so upset. He simply could not commit himself to her. Iris began to feel very nervous about it. The girl literally dug her nails into her skin on her finger from the stress. Mia Craven, meanwhile, continued to bore Theo. She told him that Iris was no match for the Duchy of Morphe and no match for the young man himself. Mia didn't understand how someone as silent as Iris could become Theo's wife and rule the North with him. Theo listened to all the arguments of the obsessive girl for a long time until finally he agreed with her, saying that Iris is really not suitable for him. Mia Craven, hearing such desirable words from the young man, glowed with happiness. She knew that he thought the same as she did. Theo would feel uncomfortable living with such a girl in her opinion. However, the future Duke did not listen to the intrusive girl anymore and headed for the exit. Mia Craven did not understand why the young gentleman went somewhere, not listening to her, and tried to stop him. However, Theo Morphe was undeterred and silently pulled the handle of the balcony door. When he opened the door, the first thing he saw was Iris standing with her back to him. The girl flinched in surprise. She immediately tried to talk herself out of it, saying that she had forgotten something here and had just come back for it. She ran to her room without waiting for Theo's response. The young man shouted after Iris, trying to stop her, but the girl didn't want to talk to him and hurriedly left. Iris, sitting on the floor of her room, realized that this marriage was only necessary to please old Duke Morph. It was all just one big compromise. Theo really didn't love her after all. The young master was free to have true and free feelings for Mia or any other woman. Iris couldn't blame him for that. It only depended on how long the old Duke of Morph had left to live, and she didn't really like Theo herself either. Besides, Iris is getting too much out of the marriage as it is. She gets the position of Duchess. Actually, she should be very happy. After all, as things stand, she's allowed to love whoever she wants. And for the future Duke, the best decision would be to marry someone he truly loves. And even considering how cold he usually is to the young lady, he still won't send her away and leave her on the street with his bare hands. And even if she does, she's not the shy girl she once was. She had the power now, and she could go anywhere. So Iris thought that the situation she was going through could be turned around for the better if she wanted to. Perhaps the girl would even finally get her freedom. However, she still didn't understand what she wanted out of life in general. Iris still didn't know the answer to that question. Perhaps it was the stress, but after the situation, Iris's temperature spiked. Exhausted, she lay in bed. When Theo came to visit her, she barely recognized his face. After a while, the girl was even surprised to learn that the future Duke had come to visit her one more time. It was already night outside. Iris opened her eyes and saw Theo's silhouette. She recognized his voice immediately. However, the sight of the young man brought back memories of the situation on the balcony. She remembered how Mia Craven had said mean things about her. Theo had said that he didn't want to marry her. Iris sobbed. Through her tears, the girl asked Theo if he was going to leave her. The future Duke gently brushed a curl from her face with his finger and asked her a question in return. The young man wondered if she wasn't going to do it herself. Iris objected. She did not understand why she should leave Theo. The future Duke thought that this way the girl could become free. However, Iris answered him that it wasn't like that at all. In fact, she did not want to lose him. The young woman herself did not understand why she had such feelings. She was embarrassed that she had taken Theo's side. How come she had forgotten his conversation with Maria? The girl grabbed the future Duke's hand and asked him never to leave her. Theo promised that he would never do that, although the young man thought that the girl was only saying that because she was not able to think straight. He asked her to go to bed, and when she felt better, he would listen to whatever she had to say. The girl didn't understand why Theo was saying all this. She clearly realized that if she were in her right mind, she would never have told him how she felt. Nevertheless, she was glad that he had made her a promise. A week after the engagement, her temperature magically dropped. The original plan was to go to the capital immediately after the engagement ceremony, but due to her illness, they stayed at the castle for another week. The following week, Iris, along with Theo, traveled to the Morph house in the capital. Even though they were already engaged, the future Duke was still aloof and cold towards his bride. It was hard to believe that their relationship was still like that. Iris, after a while, was already riding in the carriage with Theo. She seemed to have fallen asleep on the way, but clearly remembered that Theo was sitting across from her. The last thing she remembered was looking at the future Duke's face and remembering the past. Rubbing her eyes, Iris saw that Theo was gone. The first thought that came to her mind was that he had left first. However, she suddenly felt that she was lying on the young master's shoulder. The girl literally didn't understand what had happened to her. She refused to believe that Theo had sat next to her while she had fallen asleep. The future Duke had said, Iris said, that he was just about to wake her up because they would be arriving soon. The girl thanked him, but she still didn't realize if he was mad at her. After all, the young gentleman had told her he wanted to change, but Iris had left him no choice but to stay here because of her. Their engagement was already widely known in the academy, but if the future Duke came alone, strange rumors might spread. The girl thought about her future for a moment. Iris wondered if she should look in the mirror again. However, she decided it was too late to repent. Duke Morphe's servant asked the girl in surprise why she had returned so early from the festival. The girl didn't know what to say at first. She could not say that she had fainted because she had seen in the mirror a future in which she would die. So the girl decided to tell the Duke's servant Morph that she was just tired and would rather rest in her room than stay at the festival for another minute. She thought that after her words, the man would just think that she and the future Duke had quarreled. However, if they followed the original schedule and she didn't return early, she and Theo would definitely have to dance the last dance together at the Academy Festival. There is a legend that couples who dance together to the last song will be happy together forever. The dance is also a symbol that the couple is currently in a good relationship. Therefore, Duke Morphe's servant would definitely think that since the newlyweds had quarreled and returned separately, they had not danced their last dance, which was definitely a bad sign for Duke Morph. But that wasn't the worst of it. After all, this butler was constantly observing her and the young master's life and regularly sent reports to Duke Morphe. Therefore, there was no good in making such mistakes. However, the girl was too tired to deal with this misunderstanding. Iris went up to her room and lay down on the couch. It had been quite a long day for the girl today. That's why her body felt so heavy, like a soaked sponge. The girl was adjusting her collar. By chance, Iris grabbed her necklace. She pulled it out from under her shirt and stared at it intently. The girl seriously wondered if what she saw was really her future. Maybe it was just an illusion created by her mind. An illusion reflecting the anxiety she felt about Theo's pending marriage. If it really was only a fantasy she herself believed, then now she would not be able to raise her son in peace. It was hard for the girl to realize all that was coming at her. Iris, of course, understood that the young master didn't like her. She was also well aware, after the incident on the balcony, that their marriage would not last forever. At first, she thought she could pretend like she and Theo were a good couple until Duke Morph simply died. So it was very hard for her to believe that she and the young gentleman would have a child. Apparently, Duke Morph would live much longer than she expected. Besides, the girl didn't understand how Theodore, who always thought about everything with a cool head, could conceive a child with someone he didn't like. After all, divorce with children is 4 times more difficult than when there are no children. However, the main problem was that her time was limited, but the girl still didn't understand how she could die. Perhaps the only right decision in order not to harm herself and her future son would be to give up her seat for Mia. Suddenly, the girl's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It turned out to be a doctor from Duke Morph's family. The girl allowed him to enter. The man went inside and said he heard from witnesses that the girl had fallen. He asked if she was all right. Iris certainly didn't want everyone to know about it. Perhaps it was because she was using a mirror. So she decided to lie to the doctor and said that she was currently attending a senior class at the academy. Plus, she was very busy at the festival, so it was normal for her to feel dizzy. The girl asked the doctor, if it was possible of course, not to tell Duke Morph about what had happened to her. She explained her position by saying that she just didn't want him to worry for nothing. The man replied that the gentleman was really very worried about her health, but the girl didn't even believe that he was really worried about her. Iris dared to ask the attending physician one more question. A girl. She asked the man if a person could suddenly and incurably fall ill. The doctor was a little surprised by the question. However, The girl immediately calmed him down, asking him not to think anything unnecessary, because just she has a friend who suddenly fell seriously ill, because of which she had to return to her homeland. And all this happened to her not so long ago. The man asked the girl what kind of family her friend was from. After all, if one undergoes regular medical examinations, the chance of getting suddenly and seriously ill is extremely small. Of course, if you are extremely poor and unable to visit doctors, then the chances increase several times over. That's what the girl thought to herself. The vision she saw in the mirror seemed a little strange to her. She couldn't just get sick all of a sudden, especially since the doctor had said so. The doctor, of course, asked the girl if she had any complaints. Just in case, the doctor prescribed anemia medication and promised to tell the cook to give her more meat, because it was not good for her weak body to stick to a vegetarian diet. The girl thanked the attending physician for his care and was escorted out the door. She immediately continued to look into her situation. If the vision was true, Iris should guess what she should expect. The girl began to ponder that even if she could become dramatically terminally ill in the future, what could have caused such a terrible consequence? Iris decided that perhaps it was all because of her newborn son. It could really be true. After all, the only thing that can have a strong effect on a woman's body is pregnancy and childbirth. The girl came to the conclusion that this was the cause of the disease. Iris decided to do a little research in the library for starters, when suddenly, all of a sudden, the door to her room opened, much to the young lady's consternation. The future Duke entered Iris's room. The girl was surprised at Theo's sudden appearance. The young man told her that he had not heard of any of the students of the academy suddenly returning home because of a fatal illness. The girl was surprised at the future Duke's words. Iris realized that he had overheard their conversation with the doctor. The girl immediately began to justify herself to Theo and said that she just wanted to ask the doctor about such an interesting situation and nothing else. The future Duke found this behavior very suspicious. He decided to ask the young lady why she was suddenly interested in such strange things. Iris immediately began trying to steer the conversation in another direction. She asked the future Duke inappropriate questions to change the subject. The girl asked Theo why he didn't change his clothes and return to the academy like he wanted to. She then asked him what time it was. However, this trick didn't work. The future Duke saw that the girl was worried about something. The young man asked her what she was really thinking about now. After all, the girl has been behaving very strangely all day. Usually she acts completely differently. Iris began to falter with excitement. She didn't know what to answer. However, the girl remembered that any word she said in this house would be reported to Duke Morph. She knew perfectly well that she should stop and pull herself together before the situation became completely dire. The young man looked at his sister-in-law with a suspicious look. The future Duke told the girl that he would not be angry with her if she told him everything right now, as it is. He asked Iris again why her behavior had changed so much. The young man supposed that the girl might have fallen in love with someone, and perhaps that was why she was trying to disrupt all their future plans with such ridiculous images. Iris was getting very nervous. She couldn't just tell her that she had a magical artifact that she used to see her future. In addition, the young lady's mother said that under no circumstances should she tell the future she sees in the mirror. If she did, something really terrible and irreparable might happen. The girl was just in time, remembering her mother's words. Iris was well aware that if she broke the unspoken rules of the necklace, it could lead to big trouble. Even if this trouble was not death, something terrible and frightening would still happen. The girl embarrassedly told the future Duke that she was ready to tell him something, but it should remain only between them. The young lady told Theo that it was time to make things right. The future Duke, hearing such words, got a little worried. He did not understand what the girl meant. Iris continued. She said that she was well aware of the fact that the future Duke didn't want to marry her. However, if they continue to take no action, they will have to get married soon. The young man asked the girl in surprise what she suggested they do in this situation. The future Duke didn't understand how they would play the situation to their advantage, because it wouldn't work to say that they were just pretending and nothing had ever really happened between them. The girl told the future duke that it shouldn't bother him at all. Iris said that a marriage they didn't want would only make them more miserable. The young man was amazed at the young lady's words. The future duke had never thought that marriage with him could make any girl unhappy. It was a surprise to him. Iris's train of thought? The girl felt that she couldn't find the right words to make the future duke understand her correctly. Iris slightly covered her eyes full of despair. After a couple of seconds, the young lady got her thoughts together. She told the future duke that they didn't really know what their future held. The girl opened up to Theo and said that she was actually afraid of dying before he did. Iris added that after giving birth, things often go wrong. That's why she's just scared. The future duke tried to calm the young lady, saying that all these horrors after childbirth may not happen at all. No one knows how things will turn out. The girl grinned slightly at his answer. The young lady asked the future duke not to be so sure of his words, because he didn't even know how her parents died. The future duke looked at Iris in silence. The girl, in return, stood silently looking at him. They both realized that the problem with this marriage was that there were no feelings between them, no love. The girl realized that her feelings do not matter to anyone at all. After all, she received the support of Duke Morphy in a difficult life situation, when she lost her parents. And now, to repay him, Iris is obliged to marry his grandson, Theodore Morphy. However, the future Duke was in a completely different situation and in a completely different position. Since his birth, the duchy had already belonged to him by blood right, so he was not obliged to love Iris. This was confirmed by Mia's words in the future when she said that she came to visit her as a duchess. Mia even openly demanded the girl to give up her role as head wife. Iris was sure that without the approval of the future Duke himself, Theo, Mia would never do such a thing. It was quite obvious to her. Theo would side with Mia in the future. The girl even remembered that incident during their engagement ceremony with the future Duke. That night, there on the balcony, the future Duke had not pushed Mia away or rejected her when she had put her hands on his body. Iris realized that Theo and Mia had been together since they were very young. Therefore, it was completely unsurprising that they were able to fall in love with each other. However, the girl was unwilling to get between the two of them. The young lady was ready to just quietly leave if the future Duke suddenly fell in love with someone. The girl told Theo that when he found the one, the young lady would not interfere with their happiness in any way. The future Duke, hearing Iris's words, at first grinned a little. But then the future Duke exhaled and said that the girl must be very tired and asked her to rest. The future Duke said they would return to this difficult conversation the next time she was feeling better. The girl obediently agreed with him. Iris felt that she was a little too much for the future Duke. The girl tilted her head slightly in frustration, and from behind her tie her necklace showed. The future Duke noticed the necklace. Theo began to look at it closely. The thing seemed quite interesting to him. In a moment, he seemed to want to say something to the girl, but as usual, he just kept silent and left, slamming the door behind him. The future Duke slammed the door behind him. In a rage, he tore off his tie and threw it on the floor. The young man thought this whole situation with Iris was a disaster. He was so surprised when he had heard at the academy that the girl had collapsed after losing consciousness. Iris, of course, didn't remember it, but Theo almost went crazy then. While the future Duke waited for the girl's eyes to open, he literally felt his blood drying up. The young man even began to think that he was seriously ill. The future Duke was very worried about Iris and didn't understand what he would do if she didn't wake up. So as soon as they got home, he insisted on calling a doctor. And after all that the young man had done for her, this strange conversation took place. Theo, sitting on the couch, remembered the words his bride-to-be had said to him. He always thought she was brave, regardless of the situation. The future Duke didn't even suspect that deep down, she thought their marriage was unhappy. The young man sighed heavily and clutched his head, for he had met Duke Morph the day before his engagement to Iris. He had told his grandfather that he didn't want him to force the girl into marriage. It was that day that Iris overheard their conversation, but everything turned out to be completely different from what she thought. In fact, Theo was telling the Duke about how the girl had worked hard to get into the academy. That day was the first time the young man argued with the old Duke. because that was the first time he thought about what kind of future Iris wanted for herself. He argued because he felt that the girl was being forced to marry him. Iris didn't hear the whole conversation. Therefore, in the eyes of the girl, it looked as if the young man himself did not want to marry her, because he did not love her. Theo didn't understand why. Despite all this, the girl still comforted him. He also didn't understand why this strange conversation had happened in the first place. She had asked him to be patient earlier. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. It was the butler, the same man who informed Grandpa Morphe of every little thing that went on in their home in the capital. The young man did not like this informant at all. The butler said he was very happy to hear that the couple was much closer to each other. The future duke asked the butler to get out of his room. However, the butler reminded Theo that the only thing his grandfather wanted was to see his great-grandson as soon as possible. The young man asked the butler again to get the hell out of here. Suddenly, the future duke remembered the girl's words about how things often go wrong after the birth of a child. Theo asked the butler if he had told Iris about his grandfather's wish. The servant replied that the girl had probably already guessed it herself. Since she had been brought here, she had been studying childbirth and the like. The future duke was shocked to hear this. The young man, of course, thought the old man was crazy, but now he was finally convinced of it. Now Theo realized that this was what made Iris afraid. The whole situation with her seemed abnormal to him. The young man thought that usually a child was born to someone they loved, and how painful it must be to have one from someone you didn't like. In fact, Theo had understood all this before, but now he felt like a complete bastard. Soon it would be dance time. Mia had been waiting for this moment for a long time.